The snare hissed as it tightened. Lyra was yanked skyward, the world spinning until she was suspended 5 meters above a floor of jagged metal and scavenged tech. Below her stood a mountain. He was a creature of scars and ancient armor, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of the bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. He was a ghost in the machine until her blood hit the floor. The first drop sizzled against a heated plate, and in that moment, the isolation of the fortress shattered. It had started with the heat. The obsidian wilds didn't just contain life, they suffocated it with a humid, glowing intensity. Lyra had been running for hours, her boots slipping on the broad, waxy leaves of plants the size of shuttle wings. The gash on her arm was a steady, throbbing reminder of the price of a wrong turn. It burned with a cold fire, in the kind that made her vision swim and her heart hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had tried to stay quiet. Truth is, the wilds listened. Every snap of a twig or heavy breath was a signal to the apex tracker behind her. It didn't hunt with eyes alone. It felt the rhythm of her pulse through the soil. When the first vibration rattled the liquid silver of the nearby waterfall, Lyra knew she was out of time. She had dived into a hidden crevice, the spray of the metallic water coating her skin in a chilling, reflective sheen. She had hoped the scent of the minerals would mask her own, but the shadow had found her anyway. It was vast, a blotting out of the violet sky that turned the forest into a tomb. Then came the snare. It wasn't a beast's claw, but a calculated mechanical trap. It hauled her into the heights of the scrap and bone fortress, away from the tracker but toward a different kind of danger. Vax didn't speak. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace that made the floor plates groan. His hands, thick with calluses and old burns, reached out to steady the wire. He looked at her not as a person, but as a recovered piece of hardware, a lost asset. He turned toward the center of the room, where a jagged pillar of glass and wire hummed. It was a Signal-Spire, a direct line to the high citadel. If he keyed in the sequence, the pulse would pierce the atmosphere and bring the collectors. They would take her. They would reward him. And he would be alone again, exactly as he believed he deserved to be. His fingers hovered over the activation plate. Ironically, his hand trembled. He looked from the glowing controls to the tiny, shivering human woman huddled in the wire mesh. Her eyes were wide, a deep, haunting green that seemed too bright for this dark place. She wasn't begging, she was just waiting. A roar tore through the peace. It was a sound that shook the very foundation of the scrap spire. The tracker had reached the base. It was a challenge, a demand for the meat it had been promised. Vax froze. The Signal-Spire was ready. The transmission was a second away. But then he looked at the blood on the floor. Her blood, and the heavy weight of decades of silence seemed to collapse. He didn't press the button. Instead, he grabbed a heavy iron bar and began to slide it across the massive entry hatch, locking them both inside. The upper vents didn't just break. They shrieked as the tracker tore through the alloy plating like it was wet paper. The beast was a mass of oily muscle and obsidian plates, hitting the floor with a force that made the entire scrap fortress shudder. It let out a low, wet click, its sensory pits flaring as it locked onto Lyra. Vax didn't hesitate. He was a blur of scarred skin and ancient kinetic shielding, throwing his massive frame into the creature before it could reach the wire mesh where she hung. The impact sounded like a mid-air collision. Vax slammed a fist into the tracker's throat, but the beast was built for this. It wrapped clawed limbs around his torso, driving him back toward the humming power core. The floor plates buckled. It was a brutal, ugly struggle, stripped of any grace. Vax was fighting for more than survival now. Why he was fighting for the only soft thing that had entered his world in 30 years. Lyra struggled against the snare. Her fingers were slick with blood, making the knots impossible to pick. She saw Vax's shielding flicker and die. The tracker's jaw clamped down on his shoulder, and the giant let out a grunt of pure, unadulterated pain. He was losing. Truth is, even a mountain can be worn down by enough teeth. Her eyes darted around the ceiling. Above the main forge well, a massive anvil of solid tungsten hung by a single, rusted suspension cable. It was a relic of a time when the fortress was a production hub, not a tomb. She didn't have a knife, but she had the sharpened scrap shard she tucked into her belt when she'd first crashed. She swung her body, her ribs screaming as she used the momentum to reach the release mechanism on the wall near her cage. The metal bit into her palm, but she didn't feel it. She slashed at the tension lever with the jagged shard. Once, twice. The metal groaned, then snapped. The anvil dropped with a sound that felt like the end of the world. It didn't hit the tracker directly, but it smashed into the support beam beneath its rear legs. The floor gave way. The beast roared as it plummeted into the lower incinerator pits, the sound of its fall swallowed by the deep metallic depths of the spire. Silence didn't fall, it surged. Vax remained on his knees, his breath coming in ragged, wet hitches. He looked up at the Signal-Spire. The blue light was pulsing, waiting for the final command to alert the High Citadel. It was the only way to get Lyra to safety, to a place with medicine and walls that didn't smell like old oil. But he knew what the Citadel did to assets. He looked at her, suspended in the wire, her eyes fixed on him with a terrifying amount of trust. Slowly he stood. He walked to the console, his massive hand hovering over the glowing glass. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, he drove his fist through the center of the display. Glass showered the floor. The blue light died instantly, leaving them in the warm, dim glow of the forge fire. Later, the air smelled of heated iron and the sharp tang of antiseptic. Vax sat on a crate, his hands trembling as he held Lyra's arm. He was using a cauterizing tool from the forge, his movements so careful they seemed to hurt him more than her. It was the first time he had touched another living soul in decades. The heat of his skin was overwhelming, a solid, grounding presence in the dark. Lyra didn't flinch. She watched him, seeing the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. She reached out with her free hand, resting her fingertips against the scar on his cheek. He froze, his breath hitching, before he leaned almost imperceptibly into the touch. They stood together on the high precipice an hour later. Below, the obsidian wilds stretched out, a sea of glowing, dangerous life. In the far distance, the sterile white lights of the High Citadel flickered like cold stars. Vax didn't look at them. He looked at the woman standing beside him, two outcasts in a fortress built for one, finally finding a home in the wreckage.